well, let's get started with how'd you get started in the racing?
Moved to America back in 2000. The first year that I was over in PA was 2001. Actually went to Silver Springs. And without a shadow of a doubt, that's the best bang for the buck as a fan. That was the days of the 60 cars and the full inverts and the heats, inverted features, just really good, tough, hard racing. From there, I ventured down to Lincoln a little bit, didn't hit Port Royal, went to Williams Grove a couple of times, didn't really like the big half mile, but loved Silver Springs. I kept going back to Silver Springs because the closeness of the racing, that was what it was all about. So I spent a little bit of time in PA, got settled in, and then decided, always wanted to race. I'd done some rally car racing back in Australia over the years, but wanted to really do dirt track racing. And my buddy Mark, he said, this is going back. He said, I couldn't afford a big car right now. When I mean a big car was always out of reach in my mind. The costs were well beyond what I call blue collar. And he said, you really need to look at 600. So I went out to Linda's one night. I looked at them. I went, yeah, they race. Okay, yeah, I'll do that. So I went and bought a 600. And it lasted like 3/4 of a season. I was like, oh my God, we need more power. So at that point, talking with Don Gould, Jason Morrison, and myself got together and said, right, if we can shoehorn a 1,000cc motor in a 600 chassis, we've got something. So started up Sidewinder Sprints, ran that for a couple of years with Jason. Then Jason's business started really taking off, Mr. Dent. And he didn't have as much time, so I pretty much took it over for the last 7 years. Raced that, winged, all over Central PA and so forth, and then started to progress into more wingless racing, if you like. Then the D2 midget scenario started to explode across the Midwest and a little bit down south. So did Illinois Speed Week with Powerway as a D2, which was the best time. Rogie, Tom Grumbine and myself all went out there. We didn't know what we're doing. We're just going out to have some fun. And it was in support of the Powerway Midget Speed Week. So we got to play Boy Racer 5 nights, I think it was, in a row, but got to see just incredible midget racing. From there, we ventured. Wayne Davis was running D2 midgets down Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, a little bit in Tennessee. So we followed a little bit of Wayne, what I call Wayne's World. Went down there a few times, raced down there, had a blast with that, and thought, D2 was really, really good. Raced a little bit with ARDC. Obviously, you get your ass kicked with ARDC. Division 2, it was nowhere near the speed, but it was also what I call race car driver school. Now, why I bring that up, my mother used to tell me when I was very little, what do you want to do when you grow up? I'd always said, I want to go to race car driver school. Not college, not anything else. I didn't want to be a doctor or a lawyer. I just wanted to go to race car driver school. So I still remember one night at Susquehanna, I'm getting my ass kicked. I'm about to get lapped by Alex Bright. And and I'll still remember this. I'm going down the front straight. Alex blows past me, and he runs in on the high side. And I thought to myself, I thought I was on the high side, and he's like a good car width higher than me. So I just followed him in there. And I honestly shit because I thought my steering broke. It was so much more traction up there than what I was experiencing. And the car got so goddamn tight. And that's when I was like, you got to move around. You've got to. Alex took me to school that night, but I learned a lot, and I'm indebted to him because at times you get very comfortable. You think you're on the fast line, and you've got to keep searching. So from that ARDC, I was all set to put a V6 midget motor, no such thing, I know, but they're 3.5 liter Nissan motors. The last year of ARDC, when Wayne Lesher was still running the show, went to the meeting and said, guys, we've got to take the cost out of it. $30,000-$40,000 midget motors are insane. I was able to pick up a V6 Nissan motor. There was 3.5 liters, and they were $1,000 and only had 3,000 miles on it. And this is what the kids have been putting turbochargers on, pumping out 600, 700 horsepower. And when I did my research on it, I was like, hey, well, these motors can handle that with the stock bottom-end. So I did all the methanol research and talked to some of the engine guys, and they said, just don't touch it. Just put methanol on it. It'll pump out 360, 400 horsepower, and you'll never be able to break it. So I was all set to do that. At that time, I got feedback. You guys got feedback?
Sorry.
Okay, cool. So yeah, at that point in time, that was the last year that ARDC was alive, and this was all during the off season. So when it went upside down, I put a call in to Steve Wilbur and said, okay, now you got to teach me about super sportsman. So I knew I wanted open wheel. I've always been an open wheel type guy. But costs were a huge part of my choices. I knew, obviously a lot of people go 305s, 358s, 410s. 410s was never going to happen to me. 358s, I still remember, good friends with Ryan Wilson. I still remember one of the last years he ran a 358. We were talking $45,000 was his engine. And I was like, that's out of control. Then 305s, for people that aren't aware, the good 305 motors now, a lot of people will say they've got 10, 12 grand in their motors and they're very competitive. And there's plenty of people out there with 25,000 and above, drag and claw injection and so forth. 600s, if I thought I was going to drop back 5 and punt the 600s, the good injections now are 5 grand. The good motors are, between 5 and 10. A good car, you look on the Hyper catalog, and Mike Dicey does probably the best job in the world of marketing his equipment. Soup to nuts, Hyper Racing is absolutely phenomenal. Websites, catalogs, the whole. If you haven't had a Hyper experience, definitely go over there and have a look at those guys. If you want to get your kids in the 600s or so forth, because they're fantastic at what they do. But that comes at a cost. A good, brand new Hyper with all the bells and whistles, I think it's north of 35,000 now. So when you start looking at your choices in South Central PA, Super Sportsman was a good choice, which has turned into a great choice. And I'll get more into that momentarily. But that all came about because I still remembered my first year in Pennsylvania going to Silver Springs. So I talked to Steve, talked about the rules, figured out what the costs would be, bought Steve Fantasy's car. But when Steve said he was out of racing, he was not going to own a car anymore. His car was up for grabs. So I bought that, got an engine, the first engine. The engine builder I was using at the time, I went down there and I said, okay, I need an engine. And he was very upfront. He said, okay, 12, 14, 15 grand, what do you want? I said, no, let's start at 4 grand. I said, no, my budget's 4 grand. I said, so let's not get carried away here. I said, you've been building engines for a lot of years. I'm sure you've got some stuff laying around. And he did. He had some stuff laying around. So my first engine, I had nothing at all. He supplied a carb, an intake, you name it, the whole deal. Complete engine was 6 grand. So I ran that, ran it and blew it up. So we did a couple of blow-ups, but we had a couple of years out of it. And then I went over to Danny Miller and Happy Ever After. I think it was the second night I had Danny's motor, and we got a win on the second night in the car with one of Danny's motors. Does a phenomenal job, and when Kenny and everybody else has been using Danny for a lot of years, Matt on deck and everybody else, he creates horsepower, cost-effective horsepower, and he also does the carb. So I've got a Dr. Dan engine, Dr. Dan carb. And as a side little plug for him, he actually said to me, he said, let everyone know if they mention this podcast and you being on it, I'll give them $25 off a carby rebuild. So if you're going to get a carby rebuild done, get hold of Dr. Dan and let him know that you heard it on this podcast, and it's $25 in your pocket. That's a case of beer. It's a couple of gallons of gas. All good. So yeah, so we started into the Super Sportsman, and I was not a big fan cost effectiveness, right? That's always going to be wingless. Like it, lump it, hate it. Not to upset the wing guys, but a motor spinning above 8,000 in a small block Chevy, it's just a matter of time, or you've spent a lot of money to get it to be reliable. Wingless, there's nowhere near the stresses on the engines. Most nights I only spin to like 7,200. You can rev them more if your heart so desires, but there's really no need because you can't hook it up. And I think that's one of the big benefits to super sportsman and wingless racing. Even with a wing on, I raced a few times last year with a wing on at Susky, and I'll do a few more this year. The wing, thank God, they're not. The people who made the rules for super sportsmen are not stupid. And what I mean by stupid, 305s with a 25 square foot wing, really, you're locking down the motor. When 358s said, let's put a bigger wing on, let's put a 410 wing on, and that'll open up the racing, and that'll open up the second groove. And I just sat there shaking my head going, and it'll lock down the bottom groove even more. Like, come on, what are you thinking? Racing's got to be about passing, and it's not necessarily locking down to the bottom groove. Track preparation is a big part of that, but definitely unhooking the cars and having them freed up. And that's where I think the super sportsmen have it on every other division in Pennsylvania, is the fact that the wings are still very small. There's still a driver component in making one of these cars get around through the corners. So yeah, happy ever after in the super sportsman. I think it's probably, without a shadow of a doubt, I think it's on a return. I don't know that we'll ever get back to 60 cars. I think Kenny said a good thing last week from the standpoint of no division is going to get 60 cars anymore because there are so many divisions. But I honestly think if you're looking to get into open wheel racing, and if you create your own math spreadsheet, you're crazy not to really seriously consider super sportsman. You've got the best of both worlds. You've got winged and wingless, and it's a blue collar scenario. You can afford blue collar racing. You know, my engine in the car now is still only a $6,000 engine. This year we're going to put the aluminum heads on, which is in its own right is another whole conversation, guys, on aluminum heads versus big Vortec heads, and how this has come about. I think this is a really good thing long term, and I hope the people that are making the rules have some sort of a plan to standardize on the aluminum heads over the next 4 year period. I don't think anybody needs to be spending money to buy new heads that have big Vortec heads at the moment. But hopefully this first year we try them, and then maybe they look at weight rules or something to balance out the difference. You know, they're still going to be probably 40 horsepower down on a big Vortec, I'm guessing. I'll tell you after my engine gets dying out, I'll tell you exactly where they're at. But it's going to be more cost effective long term. So I think that's been a really good decision. Kudos to BAPS for putting power steering in these cars last year. Everyone knows the steering boxes were pretty much non-existent, and that's the same thing as the heads. The only thing I would say to the engine rule creators, it was absolutely asinine to allow any head 225 CFM. That was the mistake. They should have gone to an aluminum head at that point. But yeah, all in all, that's how we got into racing, and that's how we've landed at Super Sportsman. And it's a really good division. We've got a lot of good people. Everyone helps everyone else out, and it's still great racing and cost effective.